difference.
And so, because we're looking at, I mean, that panorama surveys, I mean, maybe they go, it's $2,500 a year for school with us. It's like, it's too much money, it doesn't matter. $80,000 a year for a district, and I'm kind of thinking, but, and they've got a parent component as well, but it is really comprehensive. And,
I'll have to look more at it. I'll ask my team. So I was going to say, so the other, so Keith going to be at this meeting. He's come to the last one. Scott Talbot was invited as well. And the plan is, and met with Andre Schlechter, who's the head of education. But now, Ministry of Education is hosting the next OECD for Education 2030 in May. And they're going to have, so they're like 40 countries. Schools will like there'll be opportunities, but I'm just thinking, we know also when we do these school visits, we'll get the different countries coming to see. BC is a really high performing PISA place, and we're doing the innovative for that, so that's why they're so anyways, I'll keep you in the loop. So it's actually keep this going again. And I'm too. Ronnie Allen, who's a former India assistant artist. Already. So we're all highlight BC. Come to BC. But we have another, it might be interesting to look at the things that they're doing. Other SEL assessments. I have one. American Institute of Research that did an SEL self-supporting teacher on the 5 gas ascensions for Charlotte schools. And they do this part of this mission. So let me find out more about that, because I believe it is so we would try. Oh my God. Oh my God. It's all high things. We all make it out. I'm in my PhD.
yeah, I mean, it seems that it was a little too much, but it's not. And by the way, I went to Mark Reaper mentioned so I went and looked at her up, and wow. I've sent it to all of these. Oh yeah. I just, on a personal level, as well as a professional level, is really fascinating. It's worth it. It's basically what is emotion and what isn't. And so a lot of people, a lot of teachers don't really have assumptions about what emotion actually is. She could put some light on it. What science says about the experience of emotion, how much it's predictive and how much there's assumptions, many of the emotions that are created in our own brain. So therefore we have agency. And so here's all the evidence. So it's a really very hopeful because it means great responsibility in its own states. But it's a definition, a scientific definition of the neural story, and what's taking place and what people are all lost in, to get that kind of different kind of really great. Kind of funny too. I was at TED Talk.
Danielle from the Ministry of Education about the school. We just had a big event around specifications meeting on, I'm just going to say tier 1 or universal approaches, and focused, it looks like there are 3 areas of focus: SEL, mental health literacy, and trauma informed practice. But I think
make that switch from in sense content to this competency, then I think there's total engagement because what you're doing is you're building your own self at the same time. Self-understanding, because you're understanding everyone's domains. So it's satisfying. And so, and then you can see events all over the place. So I just think that it's...
She asked a question, so how do you get it?
Part of it depends on the level of consciousness of the teacher.
Or the time we do the old form.
What they understand their own history, practice, their own emotions, their experience.
That was the time like earlier.
Their own stuff. They're going to teach them what is the so, it's, but I think people see that, and once they're there, there's no matter time they just
Showed up, it was good.
continue to
I think there's a growing interest in that sort of teachable base. Not that I'm sweating. Like 2 online shorts.
teachers, it's certainly, I think it really depends on.
It's pretty clear now.
If it's strategize from as a district perspective, it drills down and you start at the same time really
Good morning and welcome to Grand Rounds for October 26th. Just a couple of housekeeping announcements, and then I'm going to introduce our speakers today. I'm quite sure that people will be coming in over the next few minutes. And I just wanted to call your attention to our next Grand Rounds is going to be November 23rd, and that's going to be Sterling Bryan and it's BC support. So, it gives me great pleasure this morning to introduce our two speakers. And I'm going to introduce both of them now, and then we'll let them do their presentation, and we're planning on having a good time for questions at the end. So please think of some great stuff, because this is amazing work that's being done here. So I'm going to start by introducing our own Kim Shona Michael. She's the Director of Human Early Learning Partnership, Health, and Professor in the Department of Educational and Counseling Psychology, Special Education, in the Faculty of Education here at UBC. It would take me too long to read her extensive biography, so I am going to pick up a few interesting points to share with you. Kim is the recipient of several awards, including the 2015 Joseph Zins Distinguished Scholar Award for Outstanding Research on Social and Emotional Learning, or CEL. You're going to hear more about CEL. And in 2009, Confederation of University Faculty Associations has Bufdal Career Achievement Award. She's recipient of 2007 Killam Teaching Prize, and has received accolades for her work with Vancouver School Board recognition, and but I think the most exciting thing on this bio is the dialogues with the Dalai Lama. And you're going to be hearing, I think you're going to be hearing more about that as we speak. Just want to also say that this is part of ongoing work she'll be presenting, and it's you know, an amazing look at the future that we're going to be hearing about today. Our second speaker is Tim McGeer, and Tim has been an educator. In fact, I have to say here that it feels very funny to call a high school principal Mr. McGeer. So, Mr. McGeer is an educator with the VSP for the past 25 years, currently principal at U Hill Secondary School. Has been encouraging the implementation of mindfulness programs, social responsibility initiatives, and neuroscience curricula in all his schools over the past number of years. And the link in competency-based curriculum emerged through his work with the Dalai Lama Center and part of the collaboration with our help here at UBC. So I'm going to, with that, turn this over so that I don't mess up with any of the time that we actually have here. And so I'm going to invite Kim up, and the title of her presentation is Promoting Children's Social and Emotional Competence and Well-Being through Social and Emotional Learning and Mindfulness-Based Programs, Public Health Approach to Education.
Thank you. Which microphone? Do I use this one? Okay, use this one. Okay, perfect. And I'll have to see. There we go. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to present at this grand rounds and talk about some of the work I've been working on for about 30 years. So, of course, I won't share everything I've been doing for the last 30 years, but give you some of this work in terms of social and emotional learning and mindfulness-based practices. I will say that Tim and I, just if you want to know the connection, we actually met in 2005. We were both on the planning committee of the Dalai Lama's visit to Vancouver for the Vancouver Dialogues. I was the chair of the Education Day, and Tim was involved in many things. I don't remember exactly all the work, but it was how we connected. He was a principal at that time. And what I loved about Tim was that he was so open to bringing innovative practices and being open to many different educational aspects way before others were. So I really cherish that we've been able to continue this connection here. Oh, what happened? Oh, okay, just wait a second, it sounds slow. It's okay. Thank you so much. I got it. Okay. I'm going to talk a bit about, give a little bit of background of why now to focus on social and emotional learning in schools. Why now, and then what now, and this idea of bringing social and emotional learning into education as a public health approach. And then I'll be talking a bit about, give one example of one program, a social and emotional learning program called Mind Up, which is a mindfulness-based program that integrates social and emotional learning within and mindfulness and within elementary schools, and talk about some of the future directions and a little bit about what's kind of bubbling up in my lab right now. I do want to start though, however, giving a little bit of a call for a conference. Myself, Laura Boyd, and Rachel Weber have a cluster on neuroscience and education for this year, and part of that is doing this forum that we'll be doing November the 15th. It is all days, right across the street at Jack Pool Hall, and it's 8:30 till 4, and you can find out about registration. It's free to students and $25 for other people. And it just has a number of different people presenting, but I really want to double click on Dr. Richie Davidson, who is the director of the Center for Healthy Minds at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Richie is one of the foremost neuroscientists studying emotions. He's the one who began studying the brain imaging of monks and looking at the relationship between meditation and happiness. That was
featured on National Geographic several years ago. So just want to invite all of you to join us. And there is a public talk as well that will happen that evening that's free in the same location. So why now do we need to focus on social and emotional development in schools? What are the factors of why we need to do that? And what we see across schools and across society increases in a number of factors, including increased bullying, things like reduced sleep. We call it, right now, there's an article I recently read that calls it the Great Sleep Recession, that we actually are finding that children today are getting about 20% less sleep than even children a decade ago. And that has lots of consequences in terms of problems with attention and unable to learn in schools, and often looks like attention deficit disorder. We find there's decreased empathy. There's been research showing declines in empathy across the generations. There was a longitudinal study done of college students from 1979 to 2009 that looked at empathy every year among the first year cohort and found a steady decline in empathy. We've also found increased mental illness or increased concern about mental illness, although I'm not sure if the prevalence rates have changed very much. There's a lot of increased stress and anxiety among kids as well. One of the, just to highlight one of the studies that Ava Oberle, another colleague at HELP and SBPH, and I did a couple of years ago, we wanted to look at this notion of stress contagion in the classroom. And what we know from recent research is that emotions are contagious. And even like happiness, you know, if you're really around happy people, you become happier. If you're around a lot of stressed people, you actually become more stressed yourself. And there's research showing that if you're around a small group of people who are really highly stressed, even if though you weren't stressed, you will become stressed and have negative physiological consequences of that stress. So to explore this further, we looked inside classrooms, 4th to 7th grade classrooms across Vancouver. And we first went to the teachers and we had them complete a measure of stress and burnout, how stressed and burnt out they were. And then the children, we really want to use kind of an innovative approach to see how really stressed they are. And the way that we could do that was by collecting their cortisol to look at, which is a stress hormone, which we all have, which peaks about, we all have it, the diurnal pattern, something like peaks a half an hour after awakening and is on a downward trend. What we know is when people are chronically stressed, that you actually have cortisol that stays pretty high. It's like, you know, our whole stress system is activated when we feel like, back in the day, it would be the saber-toothed tiger chasing us, you know, and we, you know, our blood would leave our brain and we either like fight or run or, you know, all of that. And yet some children feel like, or some people feel like the saber-toothed tiger is constantly chasing them. So to get cortisol, does anyone know how do we get cortisol? Yes? Saliva. So I'm telling you, 4th to 7th grade students love to give you spit. It was great. The kids love the study. They loved being able to, you know, we went in the classroom, gave them salvettes, did a whole thing to get them to get it really juicy. And we analyzed the cortisol. And what was fascinating is that we found this relationship between the teachers in the classrooms that reported the highest stress and burnout had students with the highest early morning cortisol. And so we started looking at this notion of stress contagion in the classroom. We don't know if is it that children are coming in with more stresses from their families, they're coming in and they're actually, the teacher with high empathy is catching it. Are the teachers, when their teachers are stressed and burnout, are they passing it on to the students? And what does that look like? So we don't really know the direction of the relationship. I think it's some combination of the two. But this notion of we have to look at classrooms as contexts of places that really help either promote or impede positive development. Now, one thing, some of you are familiar with HELP, and especially all of the people from HELP now. You've heard of the EDI before. Anyway, so what is the health like in the well-being of children in British Columbia? Well, the Human Early Learning Partnership, we've been asking that question for a number of years. And to answer it, we have been using a population-based measure called the EDI, or Early Development Instrument for Kindergarten Children. We are actually have a child monitoring system where we're collecting a number of different population level measures on children In BC, the Toddler Development Index and the Childhood Experiences Questionnaire, or CHEC, are in pilot phases. The EDI, we have collected data on over 300,000 children. We're now in wave 7. The MDI, the Middle Years Development Instrument, is now with 4th and 7th grade children in British Columbia and beyond, actually, across Canada. And the YDI is just now almost beginning to be developed for the 15-year-olds. But all of these tools that we collect are linkable. We collect the personal education numbers. We can link them to health data as well, and education data, and look at trajectories of child well-being to really identify what are the differences that make a difference. In British Columbia, with the EDI, we do GIS mapping and are able to look at changes across neighborhoods in terms of the number of vulnerable children. If children on the EDI, there's 5 scales. If they're on social competence, emotional maturity, language and cognitive development, communication and physical health and well-being, and if they're vulnerable or low on any one of those, are considered vulnerable. And we know in BC there's about 1 in 3 children across the province, with huge variation actually across that. This is just a map of the MDI that shows you where we do a different index of thriving. For the darker colors are the places where the highest proportion of children would be in the thriving range for the MDI. So what now? We're really moving away from a focus on intervention and waiting till children have problems and fall in the water and need the life preserver and throw it out to them to bring them back up, to one of prevention, to really think about universal approaches to prevention where we teach children the skills to deal with stress, to get along with others, to have good relationships, to make responsible decisions with the life jacket so that when they hit those rough waters, they'll be able to stay afloat. Now I'm going to talk, this is from a colleague of mine who really began thinking about social and emotional learning as, and bringing the social and emotional factors into school as a public health approach. And this is from Jeffrey Rose, who wrote about the prevention paradox. And he talked about the large number of people at a small risk may give rise to more cases of disease than the small number who are at high risk. So he said a preventative measure that brings large benefits to the community may offer little to each participating person, like seatbelts. And yet an intervention which brings much benefit to an individual may have a small impact on the population, such as intervention. So take the case of dropout. So school dropout is a problem, and they did this analysis, Bowers et al. Did an analysis of dropout, and found that even with the multiple item prediction, predicting who would drop out, they were only accurate. About 50% of the dropouts could be accurately defined. Basically, that it means that 50% could identify by looking at the predicting, but about 50% were not identified. You wouldn't be able to identify. So if you think of screening measures of risk factors, you might identify, here's the 20% identified as at high risk, and 80% is low risk. But then, and over time, 75% of high risk and 25% of low risk students drop out. So if you see that a number of students who drop out of school were never identified as being those students. So hence why we need a universal approach to not just target those kids who we think are at risk for problems, but to use a universal approach to reach the whole population. Several years ago, Dan Goleman in 1995 wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence. I don't know if any of you have heard of that book. It was a bestseller at the time. And he really started saying that, you know what, your IQ does not predict your life success. Only about 10 to 15%. There are these other factors that predict how you will turn out. And he then identified social and emotional learning. A whole field began at that time and say, guess what? What we need to teach in schools is not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but we need to bring these social and emotional dimensions to teach children in intentional, explicit ways how to get along with others, how to manage their stress, and so on. CASEL, or the Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning, actually identified 5 dimensions that include self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And now these are being taught in schools all over the world. The Organization for Economic and Cooperative Development is on this same approach now. They have something called Education 2030, where they're now saying that the change in education should begin to focus on well-being 2030, where it's focused on individual and societal well-being, and the type of things that knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values that students should learn include things like compassion, empathy, equity, gratitude, human dignity, integrity, focusing, concentration, and self-awareness, amongst many more in those aspects. In British Columbia, I don't know if many of you know this, but we are in a very unique place in the world. British Columbia is one of the only places in North America and one of the few places in the world that has a redesigned curriculum that includes core competencies of thinking and communication, but has now integrated in an explicit, intentional way personal and social competency, which includes positive personal and cultural identity, personal awareness and responsibility, and social responsibility. So some of the scientific findings behind social and emotional learning include things like, we know now that it predicts important life outcomes. One study published a couple of years ago in the American Journal of Public Health actually followed a group of 753 children from kindergarten all the way into adulthood. And they looked at a number of factors that would predict how they turned out, whether they dropped out of school, whether they completed college, whether they had a job or had criminal activity. And they found that your pro-social skills in kindergarten, how you got along with others, how you listened, how you played nice, that predicted whether or not those kids with high pro-social skills were more likely to graduate high school, earn a college degree, and find stable employment. Those kids low in those skills were more likely to be in public housing, have been arrested as a juvenile, and a number of other factors. So we're finding now that and that was after controlling for socioeconomic status, controlling for aggression, and a number of other factors. And we know now that these skills can be taught through direct instruction, that now we know that these social-emotional skills are malleable through neuroplasticity. I always think about when I was in graduate school, we were taught about social and emotional, but it was almost like they were traits. You have them or you don't. You're born with them, and they're very stable across time. And now we know there's a lot of malleability, and they can be taught as well. And we know that these programs, there's been studies showing that when you have an SEL program, you can have positive benefits. So one meta-analysis with a number of different studies, 213 studies, 270,000 students in K-12, and they compared those students who had a social and emotional learning program to those students who did not. And what they found was fascinating. They not only found students that received somehow in their schooling had some sort of social and emotional learning program that only increased in their social and emotional competence and positive attitudes, they also increased in kindness and decreased in aggressive behavior or conduct problems. But what was the clincher here was, guess what? They also had higher standardized achievement test scores, 11 percentile points higher, so that this idea that somehow when you bring in these programs, you're taking away time from the academics, it actually says kids do better. So you get more, basically bang for your buck when you do social and emotional learning, because it also increases academic achievement. Now, I'm going to end by just talking about one program in which I've been doing research in schools in Vancouver. It's a program that began here in, and I'm just talking, it's a mindfulness program called Mind Up, and I brought the curriculum right here. It began here in Vancouver in 2005, and now it's grown to probably several million children throughout the world. This program that was born here in Vancouver. It's a mindfulness program, and just sort of a definition of mindfulness is considered to be a state of being aware of and attentive to the present moment in a non-judgmental way, using the definition of John Kabat-Zinn. The Mind Up program is where children, I could talk more about it during question and answer, but it's a program, an SEL curriculum that includes 15 lessons. It has a pre-K to 2 version, a 3 to 5 version, and a 6 to 8 version, a curriculum. And it actually is through Scholastic Books, and you could just go on right now and order it from Amazon. Although I would say you need training. The thing that's so fascinating about Mind Up, it first teaches kids about the brain. The first lessons are all about how our brains work. And actually every lesson, every one of the 15 lessons makes a brain connection. So there's the first ones are about neuroscience foundations, and then self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and social action. The children even do gratitude and kindness out there. There's just a brain poster they get, and 3 times a day, children do brain breaks. So 3 times a day, the teacher will stop and the children will do attentive breathing to a resonant sound. And just as a side note, I find so many teachers say that they do the program for them, because we know they do. They're like, I need the brain break. And it's really interesting how that goes. I'm going to just end here and just tell you we have several studies in which we've evaluated Mind Up. We're doing a study, this is in developmental psychology a couple of years ago, in which we looked at cortisol, and we looked at executive functions, and a number of other factors via a randomized controlled trial, and found positive benefits, a confluence of findings across all dimensions, across all measures, showing benefits to Mind Up. And recently, and if you want more information, I could tell you, but Mike Kobor, who is a colleague of mine at HELP, he's the LEAF chair and a molecular geneticist. He and I have done a feasibility study and are going to expand it, looking at epigenetic change in 6th and 7th grade students who get the Mind Up program through a randomized controlled trial. And we're going to be looking at other factors, and if anybody wants more explanation of epigenetic change, I can give you that. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
Thank you, and thank you, Kim. So yes, I am Mr. McGeer, and I'm a principal at U Hill Secondary School, just down the street. And so I'm here today to talk about what this looks like in a high school, or in a couple of different high schools, and some of the challenges and opportunities and joy that I've had taking this on as a principal in my various learning communities. So just to begin, we have here the slide. That's a graphic that just shows the competency framework. So I'm just curious, how many people here today are aware that BC is in a major curriculum transformation? That's great. So the word's getting out there. And so something to know is that within the curriculum transformation, the move to the competency framework, where we have the thinking competencies, the communication competencies, and the personal and social awareness competencies. One of the things to understand about that is these are attributes that we're wanting to develop in students through our direct instruction and through programs as well. So we're looking at infusing lessons, lessons that are in typical or traditional core competency or subject competency areas, with the destination being the development of these various attributes. So in my current school, what we're looking at is we're looking at an inquiry, or we're involved in an inquiry, which is how might we as a school, as an educational community, better understand firstly, and then implement the personal and social awareness competencies. My view is today's sort of a school principal's perspective on this huge change that's taking place, because the framework's been developed, but the creation of the lessons, the units, the assessment practices, we're probably in a 7 to 10 year trajectory in order to fully implement and realize this stream. So it's a framework that exists right now. So a huge opportunity. Kim mentioned all of these attributes and social emotional skills that are teachable. And I think educators have always known that intuitively. It's just, and we always call that the hidden curriculum, character education, if you will. But now, because there's so much new science around this, there's so much more understanding. There's the birth of the positive psychology movement. There's the neuroscience and education that's informing how we learn, how we know ourselves, how we know more about our own metacognition, our own emotional self-regulation. There's much more to the science than the science of teaching and learning that needs to be brought to bear to the learning process. So, in a sense, it's the hidden curriculum that's now being made explicit, and teachers are being asked, and it's a challenge, but it's an exciting one, to bring out these core competencies, not only with programs, but again, in the planning of their lessons in subject-specific areas. So in a sense, it presents the opportunity to blend the science of how we learn, feel, and think into daily classroom practice. It gives us the opportunity to create healthy and thriving school community, so the preventative approach that Kim was was mentioning is so important. In my school, U Hill, I'll get into this a little bit later, but it's a very high achieving school. The students are academically extremely ambitious and successful, but they're very anxious, and mental health is one of our concerns. So we, of course, the whole concept of thriving, we've taken that on fully as in our school community through our work in social emotional learning. So we also know that the research says, and so much of the research that Kim and her team have been doing informs this, is that if we concentrate on this, the kids will be not only happier, healthier, more self-regulated, they'll be more successful. So my last school was John Oliver Secondary, and here, this is where Kim and I think, started working together the second time. And we were audacious at this school. Myself and some of the teachers thought, we knew the Dalai Lama was coming to town, and so we thought, why not ask the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education if His Holiness could come to our school and have a visit. And there was a great debate about that, and finally it turned out that let's have a visit in a school. And so that provided us the opportunity, and for me as a principal, to leverage some of these ideas around social emotional learning with my own staff, which is my first concern, and with the students at the school, but also then through the how visible this was, leverage some of the social emotional work that we wanted to take on through the whole province. And so what a great opportunity to link this with the school directly and with students directly. The school context at John Oliver, a wonderful community. I love my 4 years there, but low literacy levels, low numeracy levels, low educational attainment levels in the parent community of about 20% of the parent community at the time had a grade 9 educational achievement level. A need to embrace growth mindset, which of course is coming out of the whole idea of neuroplasticity. And we wanted to work with our teaching staff around this in order to give them hope in terms of working with the students in the school, but as well we wanted to work with the students themselves in terms of their own self-awareness, so that they were defeated, they were hopeful about their learning, and they would take on that understanding of growth mindset, they can learn. And so, because we had some students that weren't as ambitious as they could be, and they weren't as hopeful as they could be about their futures. So we thought that the social emotional learning pathways would be one way to achieve this, these goals in terms of elevating, lifting up ambition and hope for our students. So in the lead up to this visit, we did about a year of preparation working with Kim and others at the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education, and designed some lessons and experiences that were very unique in that we were going to invite His Holiness to come and participate as a student in classes. And these were, in a sense, laboratory classes that took place in the learning commons at the school. But along with these very high-profile lessons, we were doing a whole bunch of other work within the school, getting the kids and getting the teachers ready for the visit itself, but again, with the hidden objective of leveraging the visit to increase the understanding of why we're doing this and what the relationship between this kind of teaching and learning is, and student success. So some of the initiatives we led up to, we were doing in classes, were compassion research within our science classes. And my personal view as a secondary school principal is that the role of science in leveraging, convincing, and persuading students, parents, and teachers to adapt the change into social emotional learning and teach through the science of social emotional learning is incredibly important. So it's not just on the periphery of the humanities or programs per se, but it's actually the science teachers that play a very important role within this in infused lessons. So there were a number of different research projects that took place around compassion. We did a study on focus, which was a technology, you can take the phones away from the kids and see what happens study. And of course this is an ongoing challenge in schools, but what does the neuroscience say about this? And what did the students, what is their experience of this when we start experimenting in these kinds of areas? We also started we did some gratitude studies as well in our psychology classes. And we also partnered with Dr. Tim Oberlander from Children's Hospital and the Faculty of Medicine out here to do a pain study. And he was interested in the effects of mindfulness and intention on patients' ability to decrease or increase their experience of pain. Our interest in this was looking at pain as social or learning anxiety. When students feel so anxious that they can't learn, they give up on themselves. I'm not good at math, I can't do this, I can't do that. What is the effect of the mind and mindfulness and intentional thinking and growth mindset on changing a person's attitude and hopefulness around their ability to conquer challenge? I guess it relates to resiliency as well. So this was an interesting study that we're still involved in year 3 at U-Hill. And the students are, this year, are going into MRIs to look at their own brains. There was a neuropathy, I can't remember the exact name of the machine, but a machine that emits hot and cold. And so the students were asked to do a number of things to see if they could increase or decrease their experience of hot and cold. Along with this, as while this was taking place, we developed an independent study and on neuroscience and education for our students, so that they were working with a variety of researchers helping to set up the labs, being subjects in some cases of the experiences themselves, but also learning about the latest neuroscience in terms of how their brains worked. And then they would present to staff, parents, and so on their learnings. This is His Holiness's visit in one of these targeted lessons that took place. Now, this is in the library of John Oliver. Prior to this, this is a gratitude lesson from one of our feeder schools. Again, a design lesson, but he participated. And while this was going on off stage in the gym, there were about 1,000 people waiting, and I think there was a webcast of about 40,000 people across the province. There was a student forum that took place after these 2 lessons with a student forum on compassion and education.
This is Jan Erickson, teacher at Moberly Elementary School. She's going to show you what her students have been doing in their classroom.
Can social and emotional development or compassion, kindness, empathy cannot be taught. And what we found from most recent science is that those skills, like understanding others, being empathic, taking others' perspectives, are malleable, which means that you're not born with them, that you can learn them.
So Your Holiness and the students are so excited to show you the gratitude circle today. And the students here are all 8, 9, and 10 years old, and we're very excited about this. So thank you. How does gratitude help you? How can gratitude help us?
Gratitude helps us by teaching us that we have a lot that we should be grateful for, and not just sitting around and knowing that we don't have what we want. Gratitude helps us in many ways, like releasing a chemical in our brain called dopamine. It's a happy chemical.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
How about when we do the circle, how do you feel? How do you think other people feel?
It makes me feel calm.
Yes, now that's the point. I think that's very, very important.
Well, everyone, thank you so much, Your Holiness.
Wonderful. Do you want a picture?
That's fantastic.
Jordan?
What's in the back? If you look this way, you can see.
Thank you.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful job.
So that, sorry, that teacher is Jen Erickson. She's a wonderful teacher, and they're doing lots of mind-up work in social emotional learning in when she was still teaching. I think she's moved on now, but and the music, interestingly enough, that's Philip Glass who did the score on that, and the director of that movie is, I think it's called The Last Dalai Lama. This movie was made by Michael Lemley. He's a producer director out of New York. So that's looking at this from a elementary school perspective. Then we asked His Holiness to come and participate in another class at the high school level, and this was part of the independent study, brain study, that was connected to the upper level biology classes. And so, yes, we want the students to be kind and grateful. These are all wonderful qualities, but what's the science of this? And so this was a lesson that really is actually a theater game in terms of maintaining focus. And but this theater game was connected to something called a neural sky machine that Kim alerted us to. And so it was just connecting in a pretty rudimentary way, but in a very, I think, visual way, some of what's possible, what is happening in terms of when we're developing focus in the brain. So that idea of developing not only self-regulation, but academic focus as well, and the whole idea of rigorous intellectual thinking is all part of the same process. The teacher here is Joanne Martin, who's still a teacher in the science department head at John Oliver.
We will be observing the lesson, and we're fortunate to have Peter Sonde join us today, who is a Mind and Life Research Fellow, as well as a neuroscientist from the University of British Columbia. So they've been curious about what science can tell us about the brain, happiness and compassion, and leading a meaningful life.
Cool. Feel free to sit down, yeah. So today we have Simran. She has an EEG on. And what she's going to do is she's going to focus on a dot, and we're going to distract her, and we're going to see the fluctuations in her mind as she is focusing on that dot, and you guys distract her. So the first person we're going to get up is Sarah and Arlene.
Sorry. So basically, dog walking really big, and then I walked into it, which is really sad.
So we're seeing fluctuations as she goes in and out of focus. And now Richard, you feel free to try to knock her off that.
So the question is x plus 7 minus 4 equals 19. So what do you believe x equals?
And so what we're seeing here is we're seeing a dip in her, a proxy for her attention right now, as she's kind of dealing with multiple distractors in the room at the moment.
Yeah, interesting. It's rules. When we're training our mind, it is quite so useful to make distinction the mental level and sensory level. When you look on the dot, so long as that dot there, it work.
Like an image.
Hmm?
So the image in front of you served as a prop, but actually what you are focusing on is the image in your mind.
Not the external thing. Then you can prolong even hours without that object. Yes. But it cannot disturb your mental focusing that image. So that's, I think, important.
Yeah, very important.
Your Holiness, Your Holiness, we are curious to know, how can we be focused, healthy, and happy each day?
I think my approach to life or to problem, I think more realistic.
We'll leave it there. So you'll have to watch the movie. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So the idea of that is to connect that sort of experience that students are engaged in their science class with the competency, one of the personal social awareness competencies, which is self-awareness, self-regulation and metacognition, but it's applying what is the neuroscience, in beginning to apply what is the neuroscience of this. So that what we're explicitly teaching students is how to be self-aware in the deepest possible way, and what is all the information that we have about the experience of self-awareness itself. The same goes for emotional awareness. So that's another one of the competencies, is not only I can regulate myself within the personal social awareness competencies within the new framework, I can understand my emotions and I can regulate them, but I can understand what they are. So that's another piece of this as well. So just looking at just innovative ways to connect some of what's going on in the science, neuroscience, and the educational, the competency framework. Here's U Hill students just the other day came and invited our U Hill brain study that's in year 2 to come and participate in Mark Greenberg's lecture on implementation science of social emotional learning programs at the Center for Brain Health. And these students are having a great time working on a variety of different projects, some of which is set up through the partnership with HELP. So the U Hill context right now, as I mentioned, high academic achievement, high parental expectations. Many of our students have tutors. Many of our families are spending tens of thousands of dollars per year on tutoring. About over 90% of our students go on to post-secondary institutions. Many students have attachment issues because their parents are offshore. There's high levels of attachment to the school, to the teachers, but we have high rates of sleeplessness at the school. There's a culture different than John Oliver, which was, we wanted, in a sense, more ambition through growth mindset. At U Hill, there's a bit of a culture of bragging or being proud about how little sleep one is getting and how hard one is working. And we have another concept there called false humility, which is I only got a 93. I only got a 95. And so great to be ambitious, but not healthy. So we've introduced growth mindset and SEL in our environment in order to help students balance these two things of well-being, but also high academic achievement within the competency framework. And we're working with teachers to connect this science and this new field, again, to their subjects and their lessons. So within that, I talked about our inquiry. We just surveyed all of our staff, as of yesterday actually, to see where are they with their confidence in terms of their social emotional learning skill sets. We put on a variety of different Thrive events at the school. And again, we have our brain study class that's running. That is connected with some of our students will be presenting some of their research on the 15th, I believe, or the 16th, I'm not sure which day, to Richard Davidson and Mark Greenberg and the rest of the panel. We're doing a part with Adele Diamond through the partnership with HELP as well. We're doing an embarrassment study. So that's 4 of our teachers have bravely stepped up to be part of this research. That basically they're going to ask their students, how do I embarrass you? And they're going to get all the survey of the ways in which they embarrass their students, and then 2 of them are going to not do that anymore, and 2 of them will just continue doing it. And so, but it's just a reminder of that intentionality and how on the social emotional end, it's not just teaching it, but it's understanding our relationships to our students are vital in terms of encouraging student flourishing and growth. And one word or a nasty comment, or sarcastic comment, even if it's not meant intentionally that way, can shut a student down completely. However, at the same time, we are wanting to teach our students how to be resilient when they're met with challenge as well. And we're continuing on with the pain research study with Tim Oberlander and Ella Week. And that's where the kids this year are going to be going into the MRI. And part of their brain study, they will be looking at not only anatomy this coming week, but then they're getting into the epigenetics as well. So we're really excited about that. Okay, and so challenges are great, and as the opportunities are as well. So ongoing staff, how do we help teachers understand this and plan for this? How do they get the time to create new lessons and assessments around this? How do we get the science teachers on board? How do we come up with working definitions of some of these terms? And I say, metacognition, self-regulation, a little easier. Emotional literacy, I think, is more challenging, but probably the most, in my view, the most important one of all. What does that really mean for a teacher, for a student? How can we help come to a clear definition of what it means to be literate emotionally and understand the role of emotions in teaching, learning, and living? And then ultimately, a scope and sequence in each school, ideally through a province, needs to be developed in terms of how we get at this. And how do we continue to infuse lessons, and not just programs, but lessons themselves, so that that scope and sequence is reflected through a curricular architecture that makes sense. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Great. So if both of you would mind coming up to the front, we will take questions. We're also inviting questions from the online audience. I will come with the microphone so that we can hear your question. Remember, these high school students are the people who are going to be paying our CPP.
Hi, thank you, that's wonderful. I teach at an alternative school just on the hill. It's called Brain Boost, and I see those challenges that you just explained every day in our work of how do we find the time for teachers to introduce this new curriculum, to wrap their heads around it, to bring it into the classroom. And I'm wondering if you've had any success with that in the past 2 months, and any suggestions about how to go about that and what's working.
I think the first thing to recognize is the challenge that teachers have, and not to understand how overwhelmed teachers are with just the level of change, not only in the curriculum but in all levels of the system. So that's the first thing, that's real. And the second thing is, I think it needs to be strategized at a district level, at a ministry level, in terms of a rollout more coherently. And there's ways to do that. But within your own domains and within my own domain, I've had measures of success, and it's all to do with contact points, how much time to be able to spend to inquire together. And I think the first thing is understanding. Like we can't really solve a problem without understanding it as deeply as possible. So that's the first thing in terms of the inquiry, as it relates to how do we define these terms? And then what are the applications? What are some exemplars? And it's great to have somebody like Kim who can come and spark the conversations. And that's what we did this year and have done in previous years as well. It really helps in terms of just generating the conversations. And also appealing to people's kind of moral sense of purpose and professionalism. And so the thing is that it's a win-win for everyone taking this on, but you have to guard against being overwhelmed. So that's the other part, is small steps.
I'm just going to add to that a bit. So there's a couple of things that I would say that are really critical. One is having a great leader that leads it, that makes it an emphasis on it, that provides the space and the time and the passion, and all of that is a leverage point. And also what we've begun in the Faculty of Education, we have it's in the 9th year, we have an SEL teacher education cohort. So there's a group of students, we now created a cohort of students who come in to teacher preparation and learn this, so it gets embedded within their whole way of seeing things. So that's been very successful, and it's actually the only one in North America that has a specific one. And then we now have a master's program in the Human Development Learning and Culture program with a concentration in social and emotional learning. So those are some ways.
Thank you. Given that STPH has a mandate for education, how would you think that we might bring some of these principles to graduate education in STPH?
you know, it's really great to think about as social and emotional learning in higher education. There's not a lot written about it, which is very interesting, and yet we know that these skills, like being able to get along with others, to be self-aware, to manage yourself, to persevere, tenacity, all of those factors are what helps you be successful. And I would even argue things like having compassion and empathy are the things that help you decide on what kind of research projects you undertake. So how would you embed it within SPPH? I think there's probably multiple points. I also, you know, and one thing I want to say, there is a whole focus right now, and I didn't mention this other research I do on adult well-being. So I mentioned this stress contagion study, and so we've been doing a lot of work with teachers' own stress through programs called stress management and resilience training, bringing mindfulness. So I almost see that, I don't know, do SPPH students ever get stressed? I'm just wondering. You know, so maybe one tactic, I mean, there's probably multiple points of entry, would be to offer some sorts of ways to integrate mindfulness-based instruction into regular coursework and things like that. It'd be interesting. There's probably, people here probably have many better ideas than mine. So I am the director for the Public Health and Preventive Medicine residency, and funny, I was just at the International Conference on Residency Education, and residency education across Canada. So this is part of postgraduate, and maybe we should talk about this more later, but it is moving to a competence by design model, and it's different from this and focuses on different skills, not so much there is some mindfulness to it, but we're not having everybody sit down and meditate, although I would advocate that. But much more of that self-awareness, self-reflection, and social and emotional competencies being a mandatory part of all postgraduate education. So there are some interesting pieces that are being done in this, and I heard some of the same words in this. So.
Anybody remembers the Phil Donahue show? It was kind of like
Thank you both for a fascinating talk. I noticed on one of the latter slides that there was a bunch of points about things that are associated with this approach, and one of them intrigued me. It was to do with no bells, no honor rolls. And it made me wonder whether this kind of curriculum and approach is having an effect on how competitive students feel, and whether that's going down in any significant way. And it seems that there was a huge amount of cooperative learning going on in those classrooms and those exercises, and I'm just curious if you would comment on that.
Yes, so that it's intentional at U Hill in terms of no honor roll, because the honor roll was making kids sick. But how do you balance? I mean, competition isn't all bad. And as Lynn Miller said the other weekend, the psychologist, anxiety is good, but only to a certain extent. So we don't want to lull them to sleep. We want to build their resilience. Competition is healthy, and yet what is the right balance? And so in our environment, U-Hill has a long tradition of not having bells, and I don't really, I mean, there's no reason for schools to have bells if kids are self-regulated. And that's a school of about 850 students. And we'll be at 1,000 next year, and they can figure it out, just like university students do. So systemically, the expectation is built in for self-regulation. So we're not dumbing it down, so to speak, and they'll rise to that expectation. And if we treat them like prisoners, then they'll act like that. So, you know, that's one piece of it. So the honor roll, that happened about 3 years ago. But has it changed the students' achievement level or desire to engage in their classes and their learning? It hasn't. Because that's a culture built into the school. But now we've got to get at the norms of that culture without taking away the good stuff, which is to be curious, to learn, to want to do well, you know, to reach for excellence. At the same time, to be self-aware enough to not get sick while doing that, and not only that, to thrive, to flourish, to be healthy.
And that's our goal. And the mindful, creative, socially responsible, global citizen is our school mission statement. So one of the things we're looking at is how do we take a mission statement and actually actualize that? Any organization has that challenge, but how do we actually program for that? How do we manifest that every day? So, you know, so we're having success with that, but it's again the balance and inviting competition when it's good.
I just want a real quick last question. Are you getting any pushback on any of these programs from parents who, you know, would prefer the 3 Rs?
It's fascinating. I thought I would. And well, first I thought you'd ask me, is there any pushback about bringing mindfulness into the classroom? And we have had some of that. Several years ago in Coquitlam, there was going to be a lawsuit. The school district came out in support, and they even went on the CKNW, no, what was this, CBC, the talk show, and there was 10 parents who called in. 9 of them said, I totally wish this was available when I was young. I wish these kinds of programs were available. Only 1 parent called up and said they should just be learning the basics, and so that, but incredibly, a couple of years ago actually, and I gave a series of talks across Vancouver in the high schools to parents on social emotional competence, like basically how can you promote your child's social emotional learning and as they enter high school. The first one was at Churchill Secondary, if anyone knows that school, with over 200 parents between the hours of like 7 to 9, and they stayed for an extra hour lining up to ask questions. I went back there again because so many of the parents don't speak, English is a second language and Chinese is their first language, and they had me do it with a translator, and I guess another 150 parents showed up for that. So I have to say that parents are hungry for this, so we really have not had, my experience is maybe you've had some experience with parents say, why are they learning compassion? Stop that.
Yeah, it's fairly well received. Parents love their kids and they want them to be healthy. However, if the achievement levels drop, then it will become an issue, and their choices for where they're going in their future get limited. It becomes an issue, but we're not seeing that. So parents want their children to be healthy, thriving, flourishing. What do we know about the science of human development, human flourishing? We know a lot. And a yoga class, a mindfulness technique, a compassion exercise, a metacognitive exercise in a biology class can only help that. So why wouldn't we do it? And so most people are supportive.
Well, thank you so very much, and please join me in thanking our speakers today. I really appreciate it.
First, I thought you were going to ask about feedback from our session, of course, in the middle of the month. But that's actually, my brain was not listening, so we were asking more generally about how student reps came into the second program. We got a few, we didn't get any feedback about student reps being more or less effective, which doesn't surprise me because I think with the scale of concerns that people are raising, some of they're being positive as well, you know, have a lot to do with sort of broader program settings. You know, there's a range of things that have come up in my first weeks on this job. Wasn't entirely sustaining. For me, I don't see that the student rep role is really sustained, and so it hasn't risen to my level of sort of like, does this need to be a priority? But I'm really open to your suggestions about what would you, if you have some concrete thoughts about how to make that role more meaningful. I'm open to it. Do you have any initial thoughts?
Well, just there's like a lot. I guess because we can't change the DL students, I mean, that's my
do you specifically represent DL?
Yes,
no, exactly. Okay.
And my relationship as a representative is more of the geographic, because it's just necessary for me to be involved in that way, but when we came into the role, there was definitely guidance about what was
in many respects, I think you're asking me the same question that we're exploring with regards to, like, you know, we assign PhD students to advisors, and as we discussed in the meeting last time, you know, a couple of people have found that a really rich, rewarding experience, and a lot of
I love it. I always say so. There's a Dolly Long teaching them like here you have a Dolly Long. It's just like this is how you
good intentions, but maybe not the right way to exercise it. I guess I would want to know, like, what are the goals we're trying to achieve by having students and are the current way that we're operationalizing this to achieve those goals?
I was writing a letter.
Are there other goals that we should be thinking about achieving that student? And right now, we're going to have to go forward with a comprehensive review of the DL stream. I would anticipate a growing role in that review from a student rep, if that were you, and anyone else, you know, taking on role in the future, we're keen to add that to their workload. It wouldn't necessarily be an obligation, but I think it would be a key perspective.
So excited.
So what are my initial thoughts? Is it useful at all? Okay, but not entirely, so keep talking to me.
No, I was just reflecting on how. One thing that also came up is I feel like there's a gap between years.
Do we have a rep for each cohort year?
My ability to penetrate and reach like other years. I don't have emails.
And how do you feel like you execute the role, and with whom do you see yourself as like a cohort of like student reps? Do you see yourself as a cohort of student reps in the school? For, you know, in our program and beyond our program?
Well, that's what we do.
Well, so beyond, like within MPH and beyond MPH and other SPPH programs, like, you know, what do we call those? Starts with A all the way never. The association of like our students association at the school level. Do you see yourself as part of that?
There's one issue I have is also that maybe there seems to be quite a bit of fragmentation. Because like there's some social coordination going on, but I was involved in exchange that happened last year. Radio silence coming back, so I'm not sure. I don't know about like there's just communication.
Radio silence, that can be a problem, you know, school, although gosh, I've been trying to facilitate a collaboration with teachers and our colleagues. Facilitation is hard. But two additional thoughts. One, if you're up for it, I would welcome you an email to Gina and Eric with a couple of paragraphs that, you know, how you would imagine a role working some gaps right now that merit addressing. Second thing here's one of my anxieties. One of my anxieties about the student rep right now is like the primary time is a faculty meeting. And in all honesty, though, that's a certain amount of my nervousness very frankly, because I'd like to be able to speak to my faculty colleagues. It's not going well without crazy anxiety in front of students. And so I'm always a little bit worried, like, can I in the room? This is like a cone of silence. You're not allowed to really bring this back because any students be correct.
But there are, you know,
what we're doing well and what we're doing
I think a lot of
and I don't want you know, the honest, frank conversation here about things that aren't going well, like causing rumors and fears and so that's why I'm a little nervousness about the student rep. Well, simultaneously, I know it actually makes great sense to have students interacting with faculty and employees. Faculty meetings is a good way to do it. So that would be, you could help me think about that anxiety. And simultaneously, paragraphs.
Right, and
I think this is a different term. Depending on the conditions, there's a way to adapt relatively quickly. Maybe the point is student rep right now for the newer DL cohort. I think that's going to be important as other transitions happen in the board. And that cohort's going to be kind of caught with transition. Just like this year's MPH generally to the college and curriculum and stuff. So they have people who can be voices for that. Makes a good deal of sense. And I also wonder.
Can you send me the links to the
Kim, I sent you a provocative email. Partly, well, because Kip is not just, and earlier today as I was tuning in, it's the kind of email that actually merits face-to-face stuff, but I wanted to start the provocative email conversation in a way that, you know, brings Pippa in, and then go from there. Okay, great. Cheers.
Yeah, so it's like,
classroom marks.
But yeah, he basically
so yeah, I think that just right now, I wonder how do we connect students more to GNA and have students feel like that's a really easy pour and way to interact and give feedback, ask questions, and some of the frustrations students are like, I can't get into class.
Okay, that's good.
Partly it's, you know, hey, wait a second, you might have missed some earlier emails, but what you register, because we are holding that space. And, you know, partly on that, but we can also recognize it's hard and busy to get everything done. We need to be bending over backwards to make it possible for DL students to get into DL classes. And so I hope students who are having those concerns earlier on the semester know at the very least we're taking that on right away. And I think students play a kind of key role in either bringing that as a conflict or saying, hey, we need another time, can we have another lunchtime session?
I manage the suite of
Is that useful?
and what
I wonder if, like, Gina and Eric's disability
I thought so, but it was my first orientation session, and you know, I hadn't attended the previous one, so I'm not sure if maybe we did than we did this time.
So what was
kind of just I was thinking we're assuming that was
anyway, so
making an ass of me by making assumptions. I kind of assume people in this program realize, hey, the program manager, you're there, like, she's a primary contact to help you think through getting through
well, and I mean, I can't even count
the mechanics of the program. You know, on an intellectual level, I can be a primary person and then feed you into other, you know, great intellectual folks here. And that also be an attitude. So as we're advocates and and noticing, you know, it's tough. Like the cohort right now, which is 70%.
Some of them felt great. Oh, okay. And yeah, so
in terms of then having the numbers, and so that's not your fault. That's not any DL person running here. It's not even Gina's. She's just started. So it's just something that people are every now and then doing. The onus is on us to still make experience as good as possible to reach excellence for the DL students that we have now. And then we have to internally review, like, whoa, what do we need to do to make this more sustainable?
Well, we need to
Nice meeting you. Optimal situation for DLs. But I was pleased that, you know, I thought the DLs might start by saying, a couple weeks ago,
our residents are
but there's a gap between where we're vision for what it could be and where we're at, and a real degree of charity amongst people in interpreting this gap. And so I want to meet people there with that level of charity spirit and see about how we make this as strong as possible living for them, and use that insight and wisdom to make it excellent more in the future. And I think student reps will play that role in no small part in sort of thinking about next steps for adaptation. Sound good?
Yeah.
Sorry, I have to quote.
Yeah.
So one thing you're going to hear